Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Level Agency's Test, Learn, Grow podcast. I'm your host for today, Amy Stetler, VP of Growth here at Level. Today's episode is actually about unpacking Level Agency's unique Test, Learn, Grow framework. So it's not just the name of our podcast. It's actually part of our culture. Laura and I actually recorded one on this important topic about 2 years ago now already. And I'm really excited to revisit it today, 2 years later. I think you're going to see that we have come a long way, baby. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my good friend and esteemed colleagues, Patrick Van Gorder, President and Chief Operating Officer of Level Agency, who was on the founding team of this agency and helped establish the Test, Learn, Grow framework, among many other things here at Level. Welcome, Pat.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, me too. Cool. And Christina Carissy Starkweather, who joined the agency full-time at the start of 2023 as the SVP of Product and Services. Although it's worth mentioning that Chrissy has been a consultant with us here for several years, helping to establish our e-commerce and media practices. She hails to us from the great city of Philadelphia. I'm only saying that as a Pittsburgher because I know she is very Philly proud. And a long career in retail and e-commerce marketing, media, and search. Welcome back to the show, Chrissy.
Thanks, Amy. Nice to be here.
Yeah, cool. All right, guys. I'm excited to be here with you today. How are you doing? Want to do a quick what's good?
I mean, I've been looking forward to this. Any opportunity to talk about Test, Learn, Grow is a good one. So it's a beautiful fall day here in Pittsburgh, and just looking forward to a good, radically candid conversation.
Excited to be back on the podcast as well. You stole the full weather's what, honestly, Philly, we just dropped our game 7. I don't know when this is going to air. So it's hard times in Philly right now, but it was lovely, crisp morning air to get my coffee. And we're going to focus on the little things today to get me through.
Love it. I love it. And thank you for helping us all avoid a recession. I appreciate that, Philadelphia.
We do what we can.
All right. I'd like to start today by setting our upfront contract for the episode. We're going to be together for about the next 40 minutes or so, and I'm really looking forward to a deep discussion on the value of Test, Learn, Grow as an ethos here at Level. What are you guys hoping to get out of the episode today? And moreover, what can our listeners expect to take away?
For me, I think it's always exciting me to hear multiple of our colleagues talk about Test, Learn, Grow and how we all think about it. I feel like I always refine my thinking and my framing, even personally, so selfishly. I think, what our listeners should take away, I think testing is one of those things, just like communication, like you always have to keep working on, keep learning about, and if you find yourself stuck in any type of a static mindset, it's good to get you reoriented in that dynamic testing mindset. And I think as we approach end of year, and a lot of folks are thinking about planning and everything like that, it's also a very opportune time to make sure you've made space to think about your own testing, learning, growth process for the year ahead.
I think it's somewhat common to say that change is the only constant, and it's accelerating at this point. But what we found is that this methodology of Test, Learn, Grow is such a critical part of the equation for brands trying to evolve and scale and improve their marketing in 2023 and 2024. So I'm really looking forward to, my objective for today is to try to share some concrete examples, and here's some concrete examples about how, this approach that sort of helps companies and agencies operate with lean efficiency and to figure out what we should be doing tomorrow and how it's different than what we are doing today works out in the wild.
Awesome. I think that's a great point, Pat. Let's jump right into that. So at a high level, how do you describe our Test, Learn, Grow framework?
I'm happy to start with sort of the bird's eye view. This is a kind of an amalgamation of 3 different schools of thinking. The first is design thinking, which is focusing on, how do you really get key insights into client problems before you even have to, launch the campaign. So how do we make sure that we're starting from as far forward of a starting line as possible? The second is Principles from Lean, which, was a formative book to me and to Patrick Patterson and to others in our organization, that we read, 12, 13 years ago. The Lean Startup by Eric Rice is a book about sort of how you can launch a startup in any field in a way that, accelerates your time to product market fit, basically. So how can we take some principles from that around prototyping, around, writing down what our leap of faith assumptions are and, developing some tests to address them. And then finally, agile, which has been, a big part of our journey as an agency over the last couple of years, especially. Once you have, a well thought out concept, once you've validated that you've got product market fit using lean principles, how do you then scale through agile in a way that allows you to kind of double down on what is working, put resources and energy against that, cut out the crap that isn't driving customer or client value, and really sort of focus on the levers that that you should be pulling to grow the business and to improve the performance. So that's how we think about test, learn, grow. Test roughly equates to that design thinking. Learn roughly equates to that lean principle phase, and then grow to the agile thinking to sort of scale and iterate past that.
Yeah, and that model really allows us to go to market, I think, in a very efficient way with the testing frameworks and the hypothesis-led frameworks that our teams develop for our clients and that we sell to our partners. I think it does a great job of also helping us assess gaps in performance marketing strategies today. And it helps us put language to some of the challenges that our clients are facing in various industries. Chrissy, can you talk a little bit more about sort of the existing gaps in performance marketing strategies and kind of how this scientific methodology can help fill this gap?
Sure, I could take a pass at that. So I think, more traditional ways of marketing, long static planning cycles, right? So like set intervals of when you do your planning and therefore when you change, when you might pivot, when you might rebudget, reframe, reliance on best practices, right? Or a playbook, even Level guilty of that, from where we came from, of a very structured, this is the 4-pronged playbook approach and we're going to just apply it across the board. And not really necessarily recognizing what makes a client or a set of client circumstances unique and break that mold, right? And a lot of clients, agencies, marketers, we also build these top-heavy programs, right, with limited diversification because it's like, well, this is the core that works. So that's where I'm going to keep investing and, getting the quote unquote proven results. But what happens, in our digital world, what happens when Google changes something or Meta changes something, right? And now that big chunk of your marketing is not doing what you thought and you haven't prepared alternate means. So I think what I'm transitioning to in terms of how this applies to how we see the world and how we think, you should always be looking at your marketing, right? It's, of course, we do planning, we do long-term planning, but it's being more agile, revisiting it more often, looking at what you're learning constantly and recognizing quicker pivot points, right? From a best practice standpoint, nothing sacred. Like we validate, right? So trust but validate. Like best practices are there for reasons, right? They are generally based on what other clients have seen working, but it doesn't work for everyone, right? And we want our team, like you hire an agency to be the experts, right? The ones who know more, that can recognize and go, oh, well, this best practice fits this type of client in these circumstances, but we suspect it might not be for you because of why. So we're going to build that hypothesis. We're going to test it. We're going to run it out and either prove or disprove. And listen, if we prove the best practice works, great. Validated a theory, we keep running in that direction. If we were right and challenged it, we help you learn and think about things differently, which is the same thing I think that leads us to more diversification, more channel testing, right? Finding other areas where we can be successful. That I think oftentimes gets baked out of long range media planning because no one likes to hear, we don't know what these dollars are going to do. We have an educated guess, but can I tell you it's going to get your 10-to-1 we see in search? No, I don't know. Here's the test plan. We're going to learn in 8 weeks, and then we'll be able to tell you longer term what these other channels could do for you. So I think that's some of how I see the other ways of working versus a more test-centric, learning, iterative approach that we try and model start to finish, from big, again, like media mix type questions to which headline is best, right? We still do that type of creative testing too.
I love that, Chrissy. And I just to add an illustration from my past, I was working on a large enterprise client with another agency who I'm not going to name, but it was a big holdco agency, and we had collaborated on this big awareness campaign, and that had been run sort of as this sort of classic 3-month, 4 or 5 month flight, and then we were in the process at that point of sort of preparing the end of flight report, the campaign report. And I was watching, this big agency, and the way that they were approaching it was they were pulling all the data down, and then they were looking back to say, okay, was this above benchmark? Good, I'm going to feature that. I'm going to say this was successful because I achieved this benchmark, and maybe I'll fade this other KPI because I was under benchmark there. And I'm looking at these guys, and I'm like, guys, so you're telling me that there's no way that this couldn't have been successful, because you're going to cherry pick the metric that makes it look successful. What are we doing here? Right. And, they looked at me like I had two heads. It's like, yeah, of course we want it to be successful. We just, the client just spent $1 million on it. And to me, that was such a moment of like, oh, that's not how this should work. Right. We need to be able to have honest conversations about what success looks like in advance. So part of what the methodology of Lean is writing down your assumptions in advance, right? Defining what success looks like in advance, avoiding a situation where you're running a campaign, looking back on it, and you're like, oh man, I really want this to have been successful. So I'm going to try to find the story that, that feels optimistic about it. We can get around all of that by defining success in advance, knowing that we're going to be successful 70, 80% of the time on our best days, and we're going to be wrong 20, 30% of our times, even on the best days, but recognizing that those moments of knowledge and information that come from being wrong in a rigorous scientific way lead to the next great campaign idea or decision.
Right. And there's learnings on both sides of the test. So what works and what doesn't work set the guardrails for future tests, in my opinion, and in my experience. So you need to understand what doesn't work in certain circumstances, because it may work in a different circumstance. So if you stack the test results to only take action on the positive, I think therein lies an issue that some clients and agencies face, because they're missing a whole other side of the opportunity. It's really interesting. So keeping in that kind of frame of reference and maybe talking about another example, I want to go back to the way you talked about design thinking as the test phase, lean principles as the learn phase, and then agile as grow. Can you bring that to life in an example for how that works with a client project or a test?
Yeah, I can. I'm happy to provide start that, and then Chrissy, I'd love if you see any opportunities to jump in. I'd love to add some of that color as well. For us, the design thinking starts from empathy, right? It starts from, really getting down at the base level with a client to understand their audience, understand their products, and understand how they're trying to take them to market. And what we find is a lot of times, what you get in the brief is different than what you actually see when you start to meet with sales leaders on the client side or product leaders on the client side. I have some examples of some products for an enterprise information products company where, we thought we were talking to one audience based on the brief, and we found very quickly that, the folks that actually had the need for the product were a different audience. It was, going from like a B2B to a B2G, B2 government type campaign. And that emerged from, spending time up front with clients, with customers, with product leaders to really understand what we're trying to sell. I joke to people, it used to be, 5 or 10 years ago, you could just show up in the digital marketplace and get leads, get conversions, get sales, because it wasn't as competitive as it is today. And the competition that was there was less sophisticated. What we find now is, there's, I don't know what the data is, but something like, 15, 20,000 ad exposures a day per person. It's some unbelievably high number. And, you're competing not just with folks right in your set, but also with everyone else that is trying to advertise to Amy Stetler or Chrissy Starkweather on a given day, which is literally thousands of advertisers. So, having something to say that is resonant and meaningful is going to be a critical step to campaign performance. So that's, to me, what design thinking starts with. Chrissy, I'll turn it over to you if there's anything that you want to feature around, like either experiment design or building sort of scaled tests around once you start from a place of a pretty good idea of what your customer looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of what the design thinking and even like, I guess it covers all of them, like lean, agile, like there are principles like the prototyping MVP that I think are really important to us. Like, hey, listen, obviously we love huge, large scale tests, but sometimes that's risky and not practical, right? So I think what our team spends a good bit of time when we're doing test design is thinking about what is a simpler form, what is a smaller form that at a minimum, right, will give us a good directional. Are we going to see enough of a difference in this hypothesis to take a bigger swing at a bigger test? And maybe that looks like a whole channel test or like even retesting tried and true tactics, right? Like I just had another conversation the other day about why am I bidding on my brand trade name? Like I've been having that conversation for 16 years with clients. And it's like, but the reality is, listen, SERP space is different. So we can retest it, but let's not retest it globally across everything, right? So it's what's a good scale? What's the right type of test? What is the pivot or persevere point? I think that's really important when we talk about these models, right? Like to Pat's earlier point of knowing what you're going to test for up front, like identifying a fail point where we go, wait a second, we're now doing harm. Like it's time to pull the plug on this because we're doing harm. So I think those types of principles show up in a lot of ways throughout. And then, once you get past the MVP prototype and go, there was value here, the growth is either a larger scale test for that client, which may be that specific test just expanded. It could look like, hey, we think we learned this thing in email. How does that translate? So like an email messaging test, to Pat's point about like audience matching and empathy and messaging, right? We think we learned that in email. Does that hold water in programmatic, in search? Where else can we test it for that client? And then the other value of the agency, right, is we recognize that test, we share it and go, what other clients have a similar circumstance or a different circumstance that we want to validate? How wide reaching is this test?
The question that I wanted to ask related to what you were just saying, Chrissy, is just really simply for our listeners, what makes a good test? You've talked about a couple of different things that we could be testing, email versus programmatic or headlines or even search terms and search queries. But how do you think about what makes a good test and what are the types of things that just are right out of the gate, like table stakes for marketing leaders to be testing right now?
Sure. So we talked about some of these principles already, right, that make a good test. So a clear test objective, which again seems very basic, but having your issue statement very clear and transparent and narrow up front, relating that to your specific hypothesis. So again, that there's a clear what is success, what is failure, how you're going to measure it defined up front. So the how, as well as the bars of what is a winner, what is a loser, what is your primary, right? So what's the core thing you expect to move, but what else are you going to look at in terms of secondary measures or key performance indicators? And then your testing framework, right? There are lots of ways you can do a single element test. You can do multivariate. You could do A/B versus sequential. There's all types of testing that have a time and a place, right? The defined test structure that also meets the client budgets, timelines, right? Like you need to work within a model that's going to be successful for your client. And sometimes that means that you may need to accept directional results and not statistically significant. And that is okay, as long as, to Patrick's point about assumptions, the same thing goes with results. Just being clear about how definitive it is, right? Directional is still very useful. And we often have to, if we're trying to move quickly, have to move in that direction. Now,
to build on that for a second, Chrissy, I think that, picking the right test that will actually move the business, if it is successful or if it fails, is really critical. And this is one of the biggest areas where I see mistakes made just in terms of picking a good test. People have it in their head that what testing means, I'm going to test the color of the CTA button, right? Or I'm going to test the hero image and the landing page. And those things, absolutely, like there's a time and a place for A/B testing, but that's not really what we're talking about here from a creative perspective. We're talking about things that will drive a bigger impact on the business. I think about, Amy, some of the work that we did in financial services, where that we had a theory that we could impact performance at various industry conferences through a surround digital strategy that we put around, and we were able to sort of design a very, very specific first case test, gather enough data in that instance to demonstrate that, we had amazing performance in terms of both, booth traffic, conversions, and digital signals around the event, to then justify scaling that across 6 or 7 other conferences over the course of the year. So, the advice that I would give, in addition to what Chrissy has just said around making sure that your test has, is designed in a way to give you a clear answer, is think about whether the answer that you get will actually move the business, and focus on the things that are likely to move the business.
You took the words out of my mouth, because that's what I was going to say about the latter, is where the latter part of Amy's question, where I see people, quote unquote, go wrong, is that they do focus on all those little tests before they ask themselves foundational questions about, are we on all the channels we should be on? Is it the strongest mix to get us the impact? Are we targeting the right audiences with the right messages, right? Like things that are somewhat global and how you're going to apply them. Are we clear on what are our best geo markets or not? Or do we need to test and figure it out? All of those big, like value prop, fundamental marketing questions, right? Like sometimes it's going back to basics. Are we confident in those? Have we nailed those? Those are the opportunities to start with before you get into all the refinement. I mean, even on an ad basis, right? Folks will be testing single images And it's like, start from a place of like dramatically different concepts that you have a good reason to think A or B could work. Get that big swing testing out of the way before you get into the refinement about text placement or font type or image background.
Yeah, I think it's been very successful and very valuable to our clients when we identify those big swings right at the discovery phase. So putting big stakes in the ground around hypotheses in the briefing documents so that we are actually creating a campaign structure, whether it's creative or media or both, that is built to prove out some of these hypotheses so that we are building off of a strong platform for every iteration. And I know one of the things that I've experienced in building that out with some of our clients is that sometimes testing takes patience. And, realizing that we live in a fast-paced world and people want to know what we learned quickly. And we put some of those big hypotheses out there and that gets clients excited and wanting answers, tomorrow. And so how long does it take, in your guys' opinion, to make that decision to pivot or persevere? And when do you know if you need to rely on statistical significance or p-value analysis or not? When can you make that directional decision versus really needing to prove it out?
I mean, I'll start with my favorite marketing answer. It depends, Amy. I wish I had one clean answer. I think that's always the magic question. But the reality is, it depends on the impact you're looking for, the data that you have, the urgency, right? Like there are a lot of reasons we test and there are a lot of factors. I wish that we could get quick statistical significance for a lot of clients, but depending on your market, your budget, all those things, like sometimes there's just not sufficient data. I think, with some clients, very high volume, like spaces like I'm used to working in, like e-commerce are a good example. You tend to have a lot of data very quickly, and you could be iteratively testing in 2-week cycles where you really get statistical significance and can like keep moving quickly, dynamically. But the reality is there are other spaces, like we do a lot of enterprise B2B work, right? Where like you're talking single digit lead volumes. And so testing things for conversion, you're not going to reach significance that quickly. So I think, while I don't have a clear answer, I think generally we train structured tests that we're going to see results in weeks, right? Like to Patrick's point about like, oh, it's a 3-month test. I'm not saying we never have tests. We try and boil it down to a form that 4 to 8 week cycles, if we can. But again, sometimes it's just to your point about when is directionality good enough. I think when waiting for statistical significance, is more detrimental than not. So again, like you're like, what are you going to lose by not making a decision? And also recognizing that the longer you run a test, the longer intervening variables. So like from a business cycle, from a seasonality, from all of those things, that you may be missing opportunity on the table. I'm going to stop talking because I feel like, again, it's like, it depends, a lot of factors aren't very satisfying, but I think when we see that, like, listen, the data, it would take 6 months to like likely get a statistically significant answer. We start looking at directional solutions and talking about like what might be lost, what's the risk, and usually the benefit of moving in a directionally, we're confident it's not going to do harm based on what we see. And we always have a measurement plan, right? So like, even if we moved in a directional direction, we're going to keep looking at the metrics and making sure that we don't see any signs of harm down that line.
And we can look up funnel sometimes too. If it's okay, maybe we're not going to get to statistical significance on the conversion, but can we get there on engagement or on clicks or something that's a little bit higher, higher in the funnel, and that supports it. And then I think when scientists look at they're trying to prove something or evaluate something, there's both the data side of it. And then there's also the mechanism, the mechanics. So like if a scientist has even a novel theory, the explanation of why that thing is working influences how much hard data you want to collect to validate that that's actually doing the thing that you expect it to do. So in this case, the example is if this new test is aligned with my, let's say we're at 80% confidence, right? We're not yet to the 95% that we want to target, but we're at 80% confidence. And the thing that we're trying to do is really aligned with a bunch of other things that we know about our audience or a business or about the way that we want to go. In that case, probably just push it forward and say, hey, we're gonna shift all the dollars over to this 80% experiment, and we'll continue to monitor and make sure performance doesn't degrade. But because we have a supporting body of theory as to why this is working the way that it does, it makes me a little bit more confident shifting that, calling that quicker. The thing, one of my pet peeves is, sitting on a test that's like at 92% and you're trying to get to 95% and it's like another week and, it's not a ton of volume and you're just like, what are we doing here? Let's try to move this along a little faster.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to make the leap of faith and trust the data. So I think that balancing act is a really good point, Pat. And another area where I hear that come up a lot is balancing the power of data and learnings from a test with creativity. And so, there's sometimes conversations happen around whether or not testing could potentially limit the amount of creativity that we can take into market. But I find that to be exactly the opposite. It enhances the amount of creativity we can take into market because we're opening up a sort of a blank canvas for testing different creative ideas. So, but tell me how you think about how creativity is informed by the data, not necessarily replaced by it.
I love, you took the words out of my mouth, Amy, as it relates to this. I think that creativity, in a environment that inspires really radical, courageous creativity, is developed by a really good test culture for a couple of reasons. First of all, you sort of in a good testing culture, people understand that ideas are what you're testing, not people. Right. So, we sort of separate ourselves in a way where it's not, the Mad Men mentality where it's like, okay, I have to pitch you on this incredible idea and I've got to nail it. And, all the stars have to align for that to, for that idea to work. And then, you go out and you launch it and maybe it's not actually what the market wants. You're kind of separating the ego from the work. And you're saying, hey, I've got these 2 or 3 really good ideas. I don't know if any of them are great. I know all of them are brand safe and on brand and, engaging and exciting, but I'm going to let the market tell me, which is great. And it's okay that you Miss CMO, it's okay that you disagree with me. And it's okay that the VP of sales thinks something completely different because we're going to put all 3 of these concepts in the market and we're going to let the market tell us. And then we're all going to learn from it together and get better and get smarter. So I think, when it works, it creates an environment where it's about the work and about, where work can be really courageous and challenging because we're not equating, professional reputation with willingness to go step out on a limb and try something new.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Anything to add, Chrissy, kind of around how you work with the teams to ensure that creativity isn't compromised?
Yeah, I mean, and I think my second favorite marketing phrase, right, for digital marketing, it's always been art plus science in what we do, right? Like, I love the science bar piece of it, like having clear yardsticks, being able to say when I was successful. But it doesn't work without that emotional connection, the audience. Like, you're not going to data your way to emotional connection with your audience. Like, it just doesn't work.
Data as a verb. I like that. I'm gonna take that.
In practice, I've found this type of process and like design thinking and like testing just generally, that being the default mode, very freeing for our creative teams because nothing is sacred. We brainstorm a whole lot on everything from a lot of different perspectives, and we're not keeping them in a box like you would with some previous modes of like, nope, this is the best practice. It's always going to have a person in the ad and it's always going to say X. So we are giving them more license. And while I think, listen, there's still a lot of healthy debate sometimes when we're showing an ad that's like, statistically, this is working. It's not pretty because that happens more than I'd like to see in a digital world, right? Like, it's not the best finessed, prettiest award-winning ad that's actually driving conversions. But I've always found our creative team surprisingly receptive when presented with the hard data facts and treating it more like a new creative challenge for them to solve. Like, that's interesting. I don't really understand why that's performing better, but let's see how we can learn. And I still want to build a prettier ad that gets results. So now we're going to tackle that in the next iteration. So while I've still seen conflict and healthy debate up front, I've found our creative team surprisingly receptive and often asking for more data than we've been giving to the creative group, right? Like, we focus a lot on creative briefs and directions and everything. And I, over the last couple of years, have seen our creatives asking for more of the results quicker, which is a change from working with my creative team 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's refreshing to have a conversation led by a creative director who actually wants to talk through the data or even comes to the table with the data in hand. That just changes the dynamic of the conversation and the quality of the work that we can produce moving forward. It's definitely a powerful byproduct of Test, Learn, Grow as one of the agency's differentiators. So this has been an awesome conversation, you guys. I can't believe we've already been together for almost 40 minutes. Just thinking through everything that we've talked about. Any closing thoughts? If you were to maybe leave with the audience with a parting thought of where or how do they get started in implementing a Test, Learn, Grow approach to their marketing?
I think two things to leave our audience with here. The first is, if you're not trying, you're not failing. And if you're not failing, you're not improving. And we have to just constantly push back on the culture of failure, fear of failure that is endemic in corporate America and even in staff, as they come here and nobody wants to fail. Like, wow, we have so much baggage around the idea of failure just as a culture that, that it's a thing to overcome. So help to recast your team around the idea that you're going to fail if you're trying new things, and you have to be trying new things to be evolving the marketing. It's not going to continue to work the way that it's always worked. It changes every year, it changes every month, it changes every week. And then, the second thing that I would say, we didn't really get to talk about agile today, but the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of being wrong. The cost of spending too much time in sort of perpetual waterfall planning and execution, rather than getting something and iterating and sort of pushing the ball forward, is is the game, right? That's where the agile piece and where the scale piece comes in. So, once you have these tests, you don't get to just rest on your laurels. You have to continue to iterate and to optimize and to be putting, new and interesting campaigns and ideas out there, because as soon as something starts to work, it starts to degrade and the performance starts to slide, after some period of honeymoon. Chrissy, what you got to take us out?
So my first one would also be cultural. So Patrick took it from the failure angle. I'm going to take it from the always be learning, be curious, ask more questions, right? So like the testing should start with, what are the big business questions, the big ones that your CMO, CEO would want answered, right? Like those are things that are going to be powerful to figure out. And then on the micro level, even the basics, the 5 whys are very effective at challenging marketing assumptions, right? Like we've all been there. We've inherited marketing in most cases, right? Unless you started with a company, a client, very much at the get-go, we've inherited marketing programs, right? And we take it for granted, like, well, it looks good, but could it be better? Right? So ask the questions about why you're doing, when was the last time you validated it? So that culturally, I think, is one, curiosity and questions. And I think from a practical standpoint, I think we've accepted this in digital marketing, like the market is changing all the time. So you are going to fall behind if you are not constantly thinking about what's coming next, what new channels are, looking to diversify, and testing helps you get there, and just demonstrating results is the best way to get buy-in for future testing. Because I think for a lot of folks, getting testing in their budget is hard, right? And it's hard to carve out chunks of money that you are unpredictable from a result standpoint. But the best way to get there is to get a record of testing behind you that shows where you've made the company money.
Yeah.
And then it's going to become an easy conversation. So the quicker you start to do that and build that backlog, the more successful you'll be in getting the resourcing for continued testing to support the culture of test, learn, and grow that you're going to build.
I love it. I love it. I think that's a great place to end the episode. Thanks so much, guys, for coming in and talking to me about this. Pat, I want to take you up on your hidden offer there to come back and talk to me again another day about Agile. I think we could do an entire episode updating our point of view on Agile in the market. So I'm going to get that on the calendar.
Can't wait.
And for everybody listening, we hope this was helpful, powerful, insightful for you. Remember, here at Level, we believe that all marketing should create value, build trust, and inspire change. And one of the ways we prove that out every day for our clients is through Test, Learn, Grow. So good luck and good marketing.